Los Angeles, California, 1968. A karate gym in the San Fernando Valley. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Chuck Norris had just finished teaching his advanced class. He was 28 years old, a world karate champion, undefeated in full-contact competitions. His kicks were legendary. His physique was intimidating. He was, without exaggeration, one of the best competitive martial artists in the entire world. That day, a small man walked into the gym. He was about 1.70 meters tall, weighed perhaps 60 kilos. He wore casual clothes, black pants, and a simple shirt. He didn't look particularly impressive. He didn't look threatening. In fact, he seemed almost fragile compared to Chuck's students, all of them big, muscular men trained in full-contact karate. The small man approached Chuck and introduced himself. His name was Bruce Lee. Chuck had heard of him vaguely. He knew he taught something called Jun Fan Gung Fu, a variation of Wing Chun. He knew he had some famous students in Hollywood. But Chuck Norris was a competitor, a proven champion in the ring. Bruce Lee was, as far as Chuck knew, just an instructor who had never competed in serious tournaments. Bruce told Chuck that he had heard about his reputation. He said he respected his skill in competitions. Then he said something that surprised Chuck. He said he would like to show him some things, some ideas about combat that he had been developing. Chuck, being polite and curious, agreed. He thought it would be interesting to see what this small Chinese instructor taught. What Chuck Norris didn't know was that the next 5 seconds would completely change his understanding of the martial arts. Bruce asked Chuck to adopt his fighting stance. Chuck got into his karate stance, solid, balanced, perfectly executed according to competition standards. Bruce walked around him, observing, analyzing. Then he stopped in front of Chuck and said something that sounded almost insulting. He said, "Your stance is beautiful, but it is inefficient for real combat." Chuck, being a champion with years of competition victories, felt a small spark of irritation. But he kept his composure. He asked Bruce what he meant. Bruce smiled, that characteristic smile that his students knew well. The smile that meant he was about to demonstrate something that would challenge everything you thought you knew. Bruce said, "Let me show you. Get into your best defensive stance. I'm going to attack you, and I want you to stop me." Chuck nodded. This was something he did every day in his training. He prepared himself, focused, ready to block or counter anything this small man could throw at him. Bruce positioned himself about 2 meters away. He didn't adopt any formal stance. He just stood there, relaxed, almost casual. Then, without any warning, without any visible preparatory movement, without any change in his expression, Bruce attacked. What happened next lasted about 5 seconds, but Chuck Norris would remember it with perfect clarity for the rest of his life. Bruce closed the distance between them so fast that Chuck barely had time to register the movement. It wasn't a run, it wasn't a jump. It was an explosion of speed that Chuck had never seen in any competitor, in any tournament, anywhere. In a fraction of a second, Bruce was inside Chuck's guard, closer than any opponent should be able to get. Chuck tried to block, but his hands found nothing. Bruce had already bypassed his defense. Chuck felt 3 impacts on his torso, quick and penetrating strikes that weren't like the karate punches he knew. They weren't big and wide. They were short, direct, and each one pushed him back despite his weight and solid base. Before Chuck could reset his stance, he felt something hit his supporting leg. It wasn't a roundhouse kick like the ones he used. It was something different, a kind of sliding stomp that completely destabilized his balance. Chuck felt his weight shift involuntarily. Then, in what must have been the 4th second, Chuck felt Bruce's hands on his chest. Not pushing, not striking, but something in between. It was an explosive movement that launched him backward about 1.5 meters. Chuck, an 80-kilo man of solid muscle, was moved as if he were a child. Chuck staggered back several steps, trying to regain his balance. When he finally stabilized and looked up, Bruce was standing exactly where he had started, with his hands at his sides, breathing normally, as if nothing had happened. 5 seconds. That was all it took. 5 seconds for a world karate champion to realize that he had been living in a bubble, that he had been competing in a game with rules, and that real combat was something completely different. The gym was silent. Chuck's students had stopped training and were staring with wide eyes. They had seen their instructor, their undefeated champion, be completely dominated by a man who looked like a strong breeze could knock him over. Chuck Norris, to his credit, did not react with ego or anger. He reacted like a true martial artist. He smiled, shook his head in amazement, and said, "What the hell was that?" Bruce approached him, now speaking enthusiastically. He explained that what he had just demonstrated was the result of years of questioning everything he had been taught. He said that traditional martial arts, including competition karate, were limited by rules, by forms, by concepts of what was appropriate or correct. Bruce told Chuck that in real combat, there are no rounds, there are no referees, there are no points for technique. There is only what works and what doesn't work. And most of the techniques taught in traditional schools, no matter how beautiful they were too slow, too complex, too predictable for real combat. Chuck listened, fascinated. He asked Bruce how he had developed that speed, that power from such a short distance. Bruce smiled and said, "It's not about muscular strength. It's about biomechanics, about using the whole body as a unit, about eliminating unnecessary movements." Then Bruce did something that Chuck would never forget. He asked him to hit him, to use his best technique, his strongest punch. Chuck, intrigued, threw a straight punch, a punch that had knocked out opponents in tournaments. Bruce didn't block it. He didn't dodge it. He simply moved slightly, maybe 5 centimeters, and Chuck's fist passed, grazing his face. Bruce explained that this was economy of motion. Why move 30 centimeters when 5 centimeters are enough? Why use a big, wide block when a small deflection works better? Every unnecessary movement is wasted energy, wasted time, an opportunity for your opponent to hit you. Chuck was completely absorbed. He asked Bruce to show him more. Bruce spent the next hour demonstrating concepts that challenged everything Chuck had learned in his years of karate training. He showed him how to generate power without chambering the fist. In traditional karate, you're taught to pull the fist back to the hip before punching, to generate power. Bruce demonstrated that this was a telegraph, an obvious signal that you're about to attack. Instead, he showed how to punch directly from where your hand is, using hip rotation and body extension to generate power. He showed him how to use body weight, not just muscular strength. Bruce weighed 60 kilos, but he could generate impact that moved much larger men. How? Because he understood that power doesn't come from muscles. It comes from mass in motion, from acceleration, from energy transfer. He showed him how to control distance. In karate competitions, fighters often maintain a medium distance, exchanging punches and kicks. Bruce explained that this was inefficient. You should either be very far away, out of your opponent's reach, or very close, inside their guard where their long techniques can't work. Medium distance is where both can hit each other, which is dangerous. But the most impactful for Chuck was when Bruce showed him his concept of interception. In karate, you're taught to block and then counterattack, 2 separate movements. Bruce demonstrated how to attack and defend simultaneously, how your attack can be your defense. He called this the way of the intercepting fist, Jeet Kune Do. Chuck tried to apply these concepts. Bruce guided him patiently, correcting his stance, his timing, his distance. Chuck, accustomed to being the master, the champion, the expert, found himself being a student again, and he loved it. After 2 hours of intense training, the two men sat on the gym floor, exhausted but energized. Chuck told Bruce that what he had experienced that day had shaken his foundations. He had spent years perfecting his karate, winning championships, being considered one of the best. But in 5 seconds, Bruce had shown him that there was a completely different level of skill, a level he didn't even know existed. Bruce told Chuck something that would become one of the central philosophies of their friendship. He said, "Belts, trophies, titles mean nothing in real combat. The only thing that matters is the truth. And the truth is simple. Does it work or does it not work? If it works, use it. If it doesn't work, discard it, no matter how traditional or respected it is." Chuck asked Bruce if he could train with him regularly. Bruce accepted enthusiastically. He said he also wanted to learn from Chuck, especially his kicks. Bruce recognized that Chuck was one of the best kickers in the world, and that there was much he could learn from him. Thus began one of the most important friendships in the history of martial arts. Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee became regular training partners. They would meet several times a week, exchanging techniques, challenging each other, pushing each other to evolve. Chuck learned from Bruce the importance of speed over brute power, economy of motion, adaptability. Bruce learned from Chuck the power of high kicks, rigorous physical conditioning, the competitive mindset. But more than the techniques, what Chuck gained from Bruce was a new philosophy. Before meeting Bruce, Chuck saw martial arts as a fixed system, a set of techniques you had to perfect. After meeting Bruce, he began to see them as a process of constant evolution, of questioning, of refinement. Chuck began to modify his own training. He incorporated Bruce's concepts about economy of motion. He began to train with more emphasis on speed and timing than on pure power. He began to question traditional karate techniques, wondering if they would really work in a no-rules fight. This evolution in Chuck's thinking would eventually lead him to develop his own system, Chun-Kuk-Do, which combined the best of traditional karate with the concepts of efficiency and practicality he learned from Bruce. Years later, when Bruce Lee became an international movie superstar, Chuck was one of his most memorable opponents in the film Way of the Dragon. The fight scene between them in the Roman Colosseum is considered one of the best martial arts scenes ever filmed, and it wasn't choreographed by a professional stunt coordinator. It was created by Bruce and Chuck together, based on their years of mutual training. During the filming of that scene, Bruce told Chuck something that perfectly summarized his philosophy. He said, "We're showing the world that martial arts are not about nationality or style. They're about two martial artists respecting each other, challenging each other, elevating each other." Chuck never forgot those 5 seconds in his gym in 1968. He never forgot the feeling of being completely outclassed by someone who looked like he shouldn't be able to do it. He never forgot the lesson in humility, the lesson that there's always more to learn, always someone who can teach you something new. When Bruce Lee died tragically in 1973, Chuck Norris was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. He cried openly, without shame, because he had lost not just a friend, but a teacher, someone who had fundamentally changed his understanding of martial arts and of life. In later interviews, Chuck always spoke of Bruce with reverence. He said Bruce was the most complete martial artist he had ever known. He said those 5 seconds in 1968 were the most important moment of his martial arts career, because they taught him that true mastery is not in mastering a style, but in transcending all styles. Chuck told a story about a conversation he had with Bruce shortly before his death. He asked Bruce what he thought was the secret of martial arts. Bruce thought for a moment, then said, "The secret is that there is no secret. There's only hard work, constant questioning, and the willingness to abandon what doesn't work, no matter how much time you've invested in it." Chuck said those words became his mantra. Every time he found himself clinging to a technique because it was traditional, or because he had invested years in perfecting it, he remembered Bruce's words. Does it work or does it not work? That was the only question that mattered. Bruce's influence on Chuck went beyond martial arts. Bruce taught him about philosophy, about the importance of continuous education, about how to be an effective teacher. Bruce believed that a good teacher doesn't create copies of himself, but helps each student discover their own unique path. Chuck adopted this philosophy in his own teaching. Instead of insisting that his students do everything exactly as he did, he encouraged them to experiment, to adapt techniques to their own bodies and personalities. This was a radical idea in the martial arts of the 60s and 70s, where most schools emphasized strict conformity to traditional forms. Decades later, Chuck Norris would become a legend in his own right, world champion, movie star, cultural icon. But he always acknowledged that much of his success was due to those 5 seconds in 1968, when a small man showed him that size doesn't matter, that titles don't matter, that the only thing that matters is the truth. The story of those 5 seconds became legendary in the martial arts community. Chuck told it often, always with the same sense of amazement, always with the same respect for Bruce. He said that in those 5 seconds, Bruce had taught him more about real combat than years of competitions. What made those 5 seconds so impactful? It wasn't just Bruce's speed, though that was impressive. It wasn't just his power, though that was surprising. It was the absolute efficiency, the perfect economy of motion, the total absence of waste. Every millimeter of movement had a purpose. Every fraction of a second was optimized. Chuck realized that he had been training for years to be good at a game, the game of karate competitions with their rules and limitations. Bruce showed him that real combat was something completely different, something purer, more direct, more honest. This lesson changed not only how Chuck trained, but how he lived. He began to apply the principle of efficiency to everything in his life. Does this work or does it not work? Does this bring me closer to my goal or distract me from it? These questions became his compass. The friendship between Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee is a testament to the power of humility and open-mindedness. Chuck, despite being a world champion, had the humility to recognize that he had much to learn. Bruce, despite his genius, had the generosity to share his knowledge freely. Those 5 seconds in 1968 didn't just change Chuck Norris, they changed the course of martial arts. Because Chuck, influenced by Bruce, influenced thousands of his own students. And those students influenced others. And so, Bruce's ideas about efficiency, adaptability, and constant questioning spread throughout the world of martial arts. Today, when we see mixed martial arts, when we see fighters who combine multiple styles without loyalty to any particular tradition, we are seeing the legacy of Bruce Lee. We are seeing the idea that truth has no style, that the only thing that matters is what works. And it all began with 5 seconds. 5 seconds that left a world champion in shock. 5 seconds that changed a life. 5 seconds that changed martial arts forever.